Dr. Isabella Reyes stood at the airlock of Helios Research Station, her heart pounding against her ribs with a force that would have alarmed most of the station's inhabitants. The massive structure hung in space like a silver snowflake, its crystalline arms stretching out into the void. After 3 years of applications, security clearances, and enough paperwork to fill a small library, she had finally made it. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, considerably gentler than the one she'd trained with on Earth. Of course it would be. Most species in the Galactic Union considered Earth's standard atmospheric pressure to be crushingly hostile. Dr. Reyes, a melodious voice chimed from overhead. Please remain still for final decontamination. A pale blue light washed over her as she fought the urge to fidget. The brutal quarantine procedures she'd endured before even boarding the transport had been thorough enough to sterilize a small planet, but she understood their caution. Humans were still largely unknown variables in galactic society, classified as Deathworlders due to Earth's harsh conditions. The inner doors finally slid open, revealing her welcoming committee, if you could call it that. Station Director Vrillax stood at the forefront, their crystalline form refracting the overhead lights in complex patterns. Flanking them were 2 security officers whose species Isabella couldn't immediately identify, though their protective postures were universal enough. Welcome to Helios Station, Dr. Reyes. Vrillax's voice resonated directly in her mind, a standard translation method for crystal-based life forms. I trust your journey was survivable. Isabella smiled, careful not to show too many teeth. She'd learned that lesson during her orientation. Quite comfortable, actually. Your retrofitted quarters were more than adequate. Fascinating. Vrillax chimed, their crystalline surface shifting in what Isabella had learned indicated surprise. We were informed humans require regular exposure to crushing gravitational forces to maintain muscle mass. That's not entirely accurate, Isabella replied diplomatically. While we do need exercise, we're quite adaptable. A low murmur rippled through the small gathering of station personnel who had gathered at a safe distance. Isabella pretended not to notice how they flinched when she moved. Indeed, Vrillax resonated. Your adaptability is precisely why you're here. Follow me to the medical bay. Your first patient is already waiting. Isabella blinked. Patient? I thought today was orientation. Plans change, Doctor, particularly when dealing with unique cases. The walk to the medical bay was an exercise in controlled breathing. Every passing alien either pressed themselves against the walls or hurried past with their environmental suits sealed tight. Isabella had expected some apprehension, but this was beyond anything in the cultural briefings. The medical bay doors parted to reveal a scene of controlled chaos. Multiple staff members hovered around a containment field, inside which floated what appeared to be a cloud of shimmering gas. Meet Dr. Zintal, our atmospheric specialist. Vrillax explained. They attempted to analyze a sample of Earth's atmosphere, without proper containment. Isabella's eyes widened. Raw Earth atmosphere, but the nitrogen levels alone would. Precisely, Vrillax interrupted. Their gaseous form is currently experiencing what you might call severe crystallization. None of our standard treatments have helped. Isabella approached the containment field, her mind already racing through possibilities. The other medical staff drew back, their various appendages clutching instruments protectively. I'll need to know the exact composition of Dr. Zintal's normal state, she said, pulling up her datavat. And get me everything we have on gas-based xenobiology. Also, does anyone have a thermal regulator? Earth-rated. The room fell silent. Finally, a tentacled medical technician raised an appendage. We have one in storage, but it's classified as hazardous equipment. Perfect, Isabella smiled. That's exactly what we need. As she began setting up her impromptu treatment station, Isabella caught Vrillax's crystalline form shifting in what might have been amusement. Is something funny, Director? Merely observing, Doctor. You're the first human I've met who seems more concerned with saving lives than proving humanity's strength. Isabella paused, looking up from her work. With all due respect, director to us, they're often the same thing. The next few hours proved her point as she carefully manipulated temperature gradients and atmospheric pressures, gradually helping Dr. Zintel's gaseous form return to its natural state. By the time the crisis was over, the other medical staff had moved from fearful observation to cautious curiosity. As she finally stepped back from the now stable containment field, Isabella noticed the room's atmosphere had shifted. The other staff members weren't exactly crowding around her, but they weren't keeping maximum distance either. Remarkable work, Dr. Reyes. Vrelax resonated. Though your methods were unconventional. Sometimes unconventional is exactly what's needed, Isabella replied, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion. Though I would appreciate actually getting that orientation now, preferably before any other atmospheric specialists decide to experiment with Deathworld samples. A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the assembled staff. Isabella smiled inwardly. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a start. As she followed Vrelax out of the medical bay, she caught snippets of conversation behind her. Did you see how she handled the thermal regulator? Incredible control for a Deathworlder. Perhaps having a human on staff isn't such a terrible idea after all. Isabella smiled. Day 1 on Helios Station, and she'd already started breaking down barriers. Now she just had to prove that humans could do more than survive. They could help others thrive. The real work was just beginning. 2 months into her posting on Helios Station, Isabella found herself missing simple things. Rainfall, the smell of coffee, gravity that didn't feel like it was programmed by committee. She'd adapted to most aspects of station life, but some Earth habits died hard. Her musings were interrupted by the medical bay's alert system, its gentle chime a stark contrast to the urgent message scrolling across her screen. Multiple patients reporting similar symptoms across 3 different sectors. Her heart rate quickened. In a controlled environment like Helios, any pattern of illness was cause for concern. Dr. Reyes to Quarantine Bay 4, the station's AI announced. Priority Level 2. Isabella was moving before the announcement finished, her Deathworlder strength allowing her to navigate the station's low gravity with practiced ease. She learned to turn what others saw as frightening into an advantage. The quarantine bay's doors parted to reveal a scene that made her breath catch. 12 patients of various species lay in specialized containment units, their bodies displaying symptoms she never encountered in any xenobiology text. Report. She called out to Dr. Engsver, a mollusk-based life form who'd become one of her more cooperative colleagues. It started in engineering. Engsver's translated voice bubbled through the comm system. 3 sylphid technicians collapsed during routine maintenance. Within hours, we had cases in hydroponics and environmental control. Isabella approached the nearest containment unit, studying the readings. The patient, a crystalline being similar to Director Vrelax, was displaying unusual color patterns across their surface. Symptoms varied by species, Anxvir replied, multiple eye stalks swiveling to check different monitors. Crystalline beings show chromatic disruption. Gas-based life forms report density fluctuations. Organic species experience temperature regulation issues. Any common thread? None we've found. We've checked environmental factors, radiation levels, even psychic contamination. Everything reads normal. Isabella frowned, her mind racing. Different symptoms across different species, but all occurring within hours of each other. It didn't make sense unless. Show me the station schematics, she demanded, pulling up a holographic display. Mark the locations of the first reported cases. The map illuminated, showing a scattered pattern of incidents. To most observers, it might have looked random, but Isabella had spent countless hours studying the station's layout. There, she pointed. All these locations connect to the secondary life support system. Angstver's tentacles writhed in what Isabella had learned was their equivalent of surprise. But we checked the environmental readings. Everything's within normal parameters. Normal for who? Isabella asked, already pulling up more data. This station was designed by and for non-Deathworld species. What if we're dealing with something that only registers as a threat to more resilient life forms? She turned to a nearby console, fingers flying over the interface. Computer, show me environmental readings for the affected areas, calibrated to Earth standard measurements. The numbers that appeared made her eyes widen. There, micro-fluctuations in the atmospheric mixture, too subtle for most species to detect, but enough to affect cellular functions across multiple biology types. But what could cause such specific alterations? Ingenuity asked, moving closer despite their usual caution around humans. Isabella was about to respond when another alert blared. More cases, this time in the research sector. The numbers were climbing. Dr. Reyes, Director Verlax's resonant voice filled the quarantine bay. The Council is convening an emergency session. Your presence is required. Isabella looked at the growing number of patients, then at her confused colleagues. With respect, Director, I'm needed here. This isn't a request, Doctor. The Council needs to understand what we're dealing with. And, there was a pause. You seem to be the only one seeing the pattern. As Isabella prepared to leave, Ingenuity extended a tentacle, touching her arm in what must have taken considerable courage. The other medical staff, we're not trained for crisis management like this. Our worlds don't experience widespread illness anymore. Isabella offered what she hoped was a reassuring smile. That's exactly why I'm here. Sometimes you need someone from a world where crisis is part of daily life. She strode toward the council chambers, her mind already formulating theories and possible solutions. The station's sophisticated systems were both its strength and potentially its weakness, designed to be so perfect that no one had considered what might happen if that perfection was subtly undermined. As she walked, she noticed the usual fearful reactions to her presence had been replaced by something else. Hope mixed with desperation. Funny how quickly perspectives could change when survival was on the line. The council chambers loomed ahead, and Isabella straightened her shoulders. She was about to face some of the most powerful beings in this sector of space, and she needed them to listen to a human's insight. The irony wasn't lost on her. They'd brought her here because humans could survive anything. But now they needed her because humans could do more than just survive. They could solve problems that perfect worlds never had to face. The council chamber was a marvel of alien architecture, its crystalline walls designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and dimensional preferences. Isabella stood before the assembled representatives, acutely aware that she was the first human to ever address this body. The situation is unprecedented, she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. We're dealing with a cascade failure in the station's atmospheric regulation systems, but it's not a malfunction, it's an adaptation. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Director Verlax's crystalline form shifted. Explain. Isabella gestured to the holographic display. The station's systems are too perfect. They automatically correct any deviation from baseline, no matter how small. But something in the secondary life support system has evolved to work within those corrections, using them to spread. Evolved. A gaseous council member pulsed with alarm. That's impossible. Our systems are sterile. By your standards, Isabella countered. But Earth organisms routinely survive in environments we consider sterile. I believe we're dealing with a terrestrial microorganism that came aboard with me or another human visitor. One that's learned to use the station's own regulatory systems as a transmission vector. The chamber erupted in chaos. Isabella waited it out, remembering similar reactions in Earth hospitals when unconventional diagnosis proved correct. If what you say is true, Director Verlax resonated. How do we stop it? Isabella smiled. We stop trying to be perfect. The hidden truth. The next 24 hours tested every skill Isabella had learned on Earth and Helios. Working with a reluctant engineering team, she began systematically disrupting the station's environmental controls, not enough to harm anyone, but sufficient to break the patterns the organism had exploited. "You're introducing controlled chaos," Enxvir observed, watching as Isabella adjusted another subsystem. "Sometimes a little chaos is exactly what you need," she replied. "Perfect systems are predictable. Predictable systems can be exploited." As they worked, more data emerged. The organism wasn't just surviving. It was attempting to terraform its environment, much like Earth bacteria might. The station's attempts to correct these changes had only encouraged it to evolve faster. "It's beautiful, in a way," Isabella mused, studying the microscopic readings. "Life finding a way, even here." "Beautiful." Enxvir's tentacles writhed. "It's threatening the station's integrity." "Only because we're fighting it wrong," Isabella explained. "We need to work with it, not against it." Her new approach began showing results. By introducing controlled environmental fluctuations, they could guide the organism's evolution toward harmless forms. It was messy, unpredictable, and thoroughly human in its methodology. A new understanding. 1 week later, Isabella stood before the council again. The crisis was over, though not in the way anyone had expected. "The organism has been successfully integrated into the station's ecosystem," she reported. "It now serves as a natural buffer in our life support systems, actually improving their stability through controlled adaptation." "You turned a threat into an asset," Director Verlax observed. "A very human solution." Isabella nodded. "On Earth, we learned long ago that fighting nature usually fails. Sometimes you have to embrace the chaos to find a better order." The council chambers, once a place of fear and prejudice, now held a different energy. The representatives looked at her not as a dangerous Deathworlder, but as someone who brought valuable perspective to their perfect world. "Dr. Reyes," Verlax announced, "the council has decided to establish a new division under your leadership. The Department of Adaptive Solutions. We need more of this human perspective." Isabella felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the station's environmental controls. "Thank you, Director. Though I hope you realize this means you'll need to accept more humans on staff." A ripple of what might have been laughter moved through the chamber. "We anticipated that," Verlax replied. "Though perhaps we should reinforce the structural supports, just in case." As Isabella left the chamber, she passed a group of junior researchers, a mix of species she would have never seen together 2 weeks ago. They were discussing the crisis, debating the implications of adaptive systems versus perfect ones. "Dr. Reyes," one called out, a young crystalline being barely out of their growth phase, "would you join our discussion? We're studying Earth's ecological systems for insights." Isabella smiled. This was why she'd come to Helios, not just to prove humans could survive here, but to show how different perspectives could make everyone stronger. "Of course," she said, joining their circle. "Let me tell you about something we call symbiosis." The station hummed around them, its systems now running with a subtle, living rhythm. In the medical bay, Enxvir was already documenting the crisis response protocols for future reference, while engineering teams studied the elegant chaos of Earth's natural systems. Helios Station had changed, becoming something neither purely alien nor human, but a unique blend of both. And as Isabella began explaining Earth's complex ecosystems to her eager audience, she knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy might not be ready for humans yet, but they were definitely ready for what humans could teach them about embracing imperfection, adapting to chaos, and finding strength in diversity. After all, that's what Deathworlders did best. They didn't just survive. They helped others thrive in ways they never expected. The end.